Hi, I'm Mara Ragan, and I am continuing the conversation with Dr. James Ragan about digitization in the Czech Republic. He is a distinguished visiting professor at Charles University for the past 22 years. And we're just going to continue our conversation with the next question. What is the greatest obstacle journalists face in the Czech Republic? And I feel like before we ended on a note that touches on this concerning like user generated content and blogging and all of that.
Well, even in the last term, user-generated content, but think of a result of that in many ways. You did have the consumer. Basically the reader was the consumer from what the journalist would put on the page or even on the TV or on the radio. But now what's happening is that basically with the approach to the internet, with the approach to being able to get your own cameras, digital cameras, you can get your own hardware. Think, for example, of a photograph, just a simple photograph. How you can borrow basically a photograph from the internet, and it will go viral, just as information can go viral. That simply so that it is exponentially out into the universe in ways that can also harm the truth. In many ways, when people are getting into what we call the prosumer or the product-oriented, writer of news, they can shape, facts in ways that will be out there in a much larger way than it ever could have been in print. And so, as a result of that, there's some obstacles in that, in the sense of what in Prague, let's just say. Here's one example too. I remember being interviewed and giving the interview and saying something about a film I had worked on, and I had talked about the basically the budget of the film and also how the film came to be. Well, in that same interview, I talked about another film, and yet when this interviewer went back, he did it what essentially was a blog. I had no idea it was going to be a blog opinion piece, and changed the numbers around and got confused between the two. And so therefore, here I was attempting to be an expert on what happened with The Godfather, since I had some work on that, and it was as though he was saying things that I never would have said. So that's a danger. Those are the obstacles. How do you I won't use the word regulate, but how can you somehow put some code of oversight, not in a, I don't want to get into a dangerous area here, not into censorship areas, but at least someone out there who's just saying, okay, this is not a fact, let's do fact checking, like they do many times in America right now. That's going to be an obstacle for them there. There are some reasons for that too. First of all, you have an older generation who lived under communism, some of whom aren't willing to let it all go yet. It's the younger generation that I believe will be able to get through these obstacles. I think they're the ones who are going to be able to somehow fight through what essentially is holding on to a past, and because I think that past will be an obstacle for much of the journalism, and how the truth will be disseminated. But Prague's come a long way. The Czech Republic has come a long way. So I'm just thinking of how basically being a consumer audience, readership, will be changed in terms of their view of it. And blogging, as I said, is still to me the biggest obstacle. I can never tell anymore whether this is a journalist, a news, someone who's actually studied the news, or the way to present the news, or whether this is just someone giving their opinion.
So the next question I wanted to ask was, would you become a journalist today in the Czech Republic, just thinking about these obstacles and their history with news media and the transition?
Oh, absolutely. I think I would. in today's world right now, because I think it's because of the technology. When you think about how far it's come, even with the internet. I'll never forget I was doing a reading. I published many books, and I was doing a reading with Yevtushenko, the Russian poet, and we were up in Silicon Valley doing it when a man came and showed us what essentially was a prototype for what was going to be the Google. What was going to be Google. And I remember him saying, okay, just choose a name. Who do you want to know something about? And I think we picked Khrushchev. I don't know why. Suddenly, all this information just came forward. We were sitting there saying, how could you do this? He says, put your name in. And I put my name in. It was a little less information on me, but it was there. And okay, so that was, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, whenever this was. Now think about what is ahead of us for the younger generation, whom I think are going to be the journalists. They're going to settle this just like they're trying to settle their country. They weren't prepared for all the corruptive scandals that are there right now. They thought they were past that. But I think that I would want to become a journalist today there in Prague. It's wide open. There's much more of an openness, freedom to say what you need. Yes, it suffers from the abuse of it, and as I said, unintentional blogging that becomes unintentional, loss of fact. But on the other hand, I think that it's a very intelligent society. They're very well read. They read books still, quite a bit. They do. But now they're reading the screen. They're reading the internet, and they're going to find ways to advance it in many, as they have in film over there. So I think it'll be exciting.
That's great, because I feel like in America today, just making a contrast a little bit, is that a lot of people sometimes are seeing that there's not a huge point into becoming, quote unquote, a journalist today, just because it's so easy for someone to just pick up a camera or just begin a blog. Whereas I feel like there's still all this appreciation in the Czech Republic for now being able to participate in something that they weren't able to during communism.
Right.
So I think that is an amazing thing for journalism and journalism's future.
Well, you know what's happening there now too? I've noticed it more and more. There are several major universities or good, universities in the city. All their curriculum, they have so much curriculum going now on digital journalism. I mean, they're actually having courses in it. They're teaching people how to use it correctly. Once you start doing that, once you start educating people into the proper use of what it would be, digital journalist, it then becomes different, you see. So I think it'll grow out of that period of transition right now. And I know that there's one called online transition. It's TOL, I think it is. They have a online magazine called TOL, and it's called Around the Block. It means Soviet bloc, all the countries, BLOC. And they are putting the news, good hard news on. And those writers, those people who are journalists, there are Czechs, they're putting that magazine. It's their truth. But consider that if you're going to educate people on how to do use the different hardware, how to use your laptops, how to be able to edit without having to go into studio. Newsrooms might be opening up in a different form. As we might say, they're closing down newsrooms. But I don't think you'll ever lose the paper print. I don't think that'll ever happen totally. But I think the education of how to continue great journalism, I think whether we are leveling out in some plateau or even going downward, I don't know here in this country, but I do know they're on the rise with it. They're not going backwards, that's for sure. The more education you give them, I think the greater advancements they'll appreciate.
That's great. So my next question is, how has the rise in social media affected the Czech Republic? And we have touched on this a bit already, right. But social media is in their use of
Facebook, all of Facebook. See, here, there was a magazine called New Presence that was there, English speaking, and they had even interviewed me in that New Presence magazine. Like the Prague Post, they, of course, tried to change to go digitization, and they didn't survive for some reason. Yet the Prague Post, as they say, they got twice as many hits online than they ever got with people with with subscriptions for the print paper. But I do remember the New Presence giving the interview and talking of what I called anarcho-narcissism, that basically if you start seeing social media like Facebook and like tweeting and all the rest of it that comes with it, that you run into the danger of those people becoming the narcissism of what they're reporting, what they're putting on. People want to use that also as fact. Much of it is going to be, it's going to be untruthful. It's the only word I can use because the word truth means so much to me. And so that rise of social media could pose a problem. It could pose because, see, once you get into tabloid culture, what you're really giving up is context. We call it the instant imaging of truth. It's a big problem worldwide in journalism. It happens every day. I'll never forget the most prominent case happened with a man that I I won't mention the journalist's name. It was on CBS News where the bombs were falling on Iraq, and there was toward Israel there were a lot of rockets being shot, and Scud missiles were coming in, and patriots were taking them out. But somehow, to get to the news first, at instant imaging of truth, they were reporting that the Scud missiles were bombing Haifa in Israel. And so every Jewish relative in this country bombarded the telephones, trying to get to their relatives, thinking it was happening, and it wasn't happening at all. So that's an example of, where I'm saying that here's television giving the wrong fact, instant imaging of truth, and in some ways I look at social media as doing that as well, giving you events without context, without giving you all of it, in the attempt to be first. You have to report something. I'm going to put something out. I just walked out of this and I'm going to tell you right away. And not allowing the research of that event to have its proper course. So, that would be the one thing that I would say social media can be a disadvantage. But in many other ways, it did help in the Arab Spring, let's say in Egypt. It did help in other places, and it happened even during the Tiananmen period where people had discovered the internet, and many of them were on it trying to give the news, and that's why you had so many students and people from the outer lands coming into Tiananmen Square to support the students. So it has its positive and it does have the negative.
And then the last question I wanted to ask is about the Velvet Revolution, and I wondered how you feel the Velvet Revolution has benefited the Czech Republic.
Well, in many ways, the Velvet Revolution, as I said, it really surrounds that one moment when the students were beaten in that tunneled area after the Berlin Wall had fallen. What you had was communism literally just breaking up totally, and
I understand it was meant to be a peaceful protest
yes.
as well. I just realized I wanted to give a little bit of background on what the Velvet Revolution actually was for those who might not know.
Right. Well, it was happening throughout Europe after the Berlin Wall fell. It happened first in Poland, then Hungary, and then finally in Prague, where the Communist Party itself started losing favor with the people. So when students were showing, their revolutionary fervor of splitting finally from communism, that event happened, and because of how the newspapers handled it, it changed the whole society. So in terms of the Velvet Revolution, it was peaceful. Not many lives were lost that day, but make no mistake about it. In the Prague Spring, when the Russians invaded and came into Czechoslovakia in 1968, many lives were lost. And continuing all those years under communist domination, the torture labs, the places where people would never be seen again, wasn't as bad, let's say, as it was in the gulags in Russia or in other places in other countries, but it still was going on. So after the Velvet Revolution, that was gone. Václav Havel, who was a friend of mine, also, as a new president, he became a moral center of the city. He was wise enough to have a whole new police force constructed. He had a whole new police force put together in little jitney cars. Everybody knew that was the Havel police, as opposed to the police who had been under communism, who were very reluctant to change their whole way of treating the country. So that was happening in all aspects of the society. The Velvet Revolution allowed Havel, for example, a noted international playwright, to have this huge theater festival on the islands. The arts had opened up. Journalism had opened up, of course, and journalism reportage of all of this was exciting, to be able to get things said that was never said before. So the Velvet Revolution really did make a big difference. It was peaceful. It was a dissolution of the communist, domination, and it later even gave way to Slovakia splitting from the Czech Republic in a peaceful way also, where that wasn't happening in most other countries, whether it was Kosovo, whether it was, in the Yugoslavia breakup there, or even in Russia with Chechnya and with Georgia and the rest of it. But in America, in the Czech Republic and in Czechoslovakia, Havel became the first president of Czechoslovakia, and then when the split was, that was peaceful. So yeah, the Velvet Revolution had a kind of tumbling sense of finding where it could end up, and it ended up in just democracy, and it ended up, I think, in terms of greater freedoms. As I said, with it's been said many times, with freedom comes responsibility, and so that's where they are right now, taking a lot of responsibility for their freedom.
The long-term effects of the Velvet Revolution concerning journalism, do you see that as being one of the greatest reasons that they are able to, already have switched over to digital television by 2012?
I think so. For example, as I mentioned, you wouldn't think that these influences were part of it, but you do know, or may not know, that in Prague it became the central city for filmmaking. International filmmaking kept coming in, and with that international filmmaking came in technical advances. So much was being introduced from the outside into the country in terms of the very hardware we're talking about. So much was able to happen because of the freedoms they had, and the way they were looking at outside influences. It was welcomed, and so I think that that's another reason why long term, the country will enjoy even a greater, succession of advancements in this area, in journalism especially. I just think they're pulling it together, as I said, through education. They had a lot of foreign influences who came in, journalists, New York Times correspondents who stayed there in Prague. They loved it. And so it's influenced. Prague Post came out of that. 4 young students from universities across the country who decided, I'm going to sit out what was basically then, I guess, our recession, and I'm going to go to Europe. And they ended up in Prague and started the Prague Post, along with some other people. And there was another journal like that. This is how journalism has always been. People who found the space and the need for it, and they filled it.
Well, that is the end of all of my questions.
Thank you.
I thank you so much for participating in our project.
And, pardon me, journalists are taught to be succinct and to be able to write. Just excuse me for taking off in my rambling way. That's the writer part of me, creative writer part of me.
It was perfect. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.